Spooky's back. All right. This is A Lil Spooky, podcast about things that spook us just a little bit. Things like aliens, cryptids, conspiracies, or when you're scrolling through TikTok and you come across an old theme song to a childhood cartoon that you've never even thought of for like 15 years, and it starts unlocking weird childhood memories. Time is meaningless. Life is short. My name is Everett.
My name is Colleen, and we're back, baby! Sorry about our short absence. We had a crazy week last week.
Let's just summarize our week in 2 words. Get vaccinated.
Yes. Just get your vaccine, everyone. Please.
We'll leave it at that.
Yes.
But other than that, I feel like even though we've been busy, like it's not like a whole lot has happened recently. I'm trying to think of like what's new with us, right? And all I can think of is that I cut myself while shaving. We started watching Midnight Mass a couple nights ago. Very good.
Yes, and as a former Catholic schoolgirl, the Mass scenes just bring you right back.
Just bring you right back.
They just bring you right back to Tuesday morning Mass in elementary school.
And our dog pooped on the floor. That's all that's really new with us.
Yeah. So you didn't miss anything at all. But we're going to redeem ourselves. I hope this episode makes up for the lost week.
So what are we talking about?
Can you think of anything spookier than the American government during the Cold War?
Maybe the Russian government during the Cold War.
That is a very good point. At the very least, I would say they're probably equally spooky.
Gotta make those nukes and threaten each other all the time with them.
Right. Well, today we are talking about a recently declassified CIA experiment that occurred between 1975 and 1995. And I believe it was 2017 when the project became fully declassified. About 13 million pages of information were released about this project. It is not as sinister as MK Ultra, which I will do an episode on at some point, probably more than one episode. There's just so much to talk about. This project did not have unsuspecting subjects.
Sure,
but
they weren't captured and drugged.
Right, no capturing, no drugging, but the concept itself is bizarre and spooky.
Okay.
We are going to be talking about Project Stargate. So it's the mid-1970s. We're at the height of the Cold War. America's trying to get ahead of the Soviets, from weapons to technology to the space race. And it's our goal not to just be the best, but we also have to be the first because we're America.
And how else will we win?
Exactly. So what can set the U.S. apart from the rest of the world other than like way too many nuclear weapons?
Colonizing the moon.
Yes, that would do it. But I'm talking about during the 1970s. And the answer is being able to harness and weaponize psychic abilities.
Yeah. That would work too.
Yeah, it totally would.
It would definitely make colonizing the moon easier, I think, if we were to able to weaponize our thoughts.
Well, the CIA definitely thought it was possible. And from the early 70s to the mid-90s, they and the U.S. military ran a study focused on psychic phenomena. And they were trying to figure out how they could weaponize psychic powers for national security.
It's like a failed novelist just got into the CIA somehow and is just putting their ideas into their studies.
I mean, it's a little like it's that bizarre. I don't think the majority of the government took this project particularly seriously, but the program itself ran for 20 solid years. And not only that, but the military did actually utilize the subjects of this program for hundreds of intelligence operations. So clearly they thought it was effective enough to utilize.
Or they were just trying to get a bigger sample size for their actual studies.
Well, no. During the program, there were actually only ever 22 subjects.
Right, but I mean like more like opportunities to test them.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yes.
Right.
And I'll explain some of those. But what's interesting is the final report that wraps up this project and the evidence that came out of those military operations that these subjects were part of kind of suggests that psychic phenomena is real. And they kind of say as much in the final report. Yes and no.
Sure.
They outwardly say this is useless and didn't prove anything, but they also underlyingly say we can't explain what happened.
Kind of like the UFO report.
Exactly. So in 2017, they released 13 million pages of declassified documents covering this project.
So you read through all of that for this episode.
I was just going to give you a caveat. This is a long and twisted story, and I'm giving you the very high level outline. And I focused mostly on the parts that are more interesting rather than the technical. Then the project got handed to the Central Intelligence Agency, and from there it was handed to the National Security. It switched hands. It had different names. I'm giving you the gist of the project.
What is the meaning of Stargate?
So that I'm not sure. And actually, the project itself had several names. Stargate was just the name it had when the project closed officially. I think at one point when the military had it, it was called Project Grill Flame. And then there was another one.
Flavor Town.
Yeah. I'm not sure. You would have to ask somebody who names these projects what their thought process is. But it's known as Stargate because that was its final name.
What would you name it?
Ooh.
I think I would name it I imagine this had to go through a lot of hurdles to even get started. So I imagine there's some big boss, middle management type guy named Steve that says, no, you can't do it. But then when I got funded, I'm going to name it Project Fuck You, Steve.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Huh.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. It might as well be Stargate. We're talking about psychics here. It's a bizarre story. So let's get into it. First off, we know that the American government is not particularly rational at all times. But what would make them think that studying psychic abilities would be a good way to spend time and money when you're in the midst of a Cold War? Well, in 1972, a classified report by American intelligence communities claimed that the Soviet Union was spending a lot of time and money studying ESP and psychokinesis.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, if the Soviets are doing it, we have to do it, and we have to do it faster and better. But we wouldn't have even thought of it unless the crazy Russians had started doing it first.
Can you tell me what is the difference between telekinesis and psychokinesis?
I can't.
Oh.
I can't tell you the difference because I honestly don't know.
Well, obviously telekinesis is just moving stuff with your mind. So I'm wondering if psychokinesis is the same thing or if it's just related.
I don't know. ESP is just extrasensory perception. I'm wondering if it's just a blanket term for
kineses,
using your brain to do things other than thinking.
Mm.
I'm not sure. Man, you're making me look bad on my episode. Side note, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, but wouldn't you be fascinated to get classified Cold War era Soviet documents to see what kind of crazy shit the Soviet Union was getting into during the Cold War?
Not to read 13 million pages of it. That's crazy.
Yeah, but don't you think that would be we had MK Ultra, we had this weird project. How weird do you think Soviet projects got? They had to get pretty freaky.
I'm sure they had a lot of test subjects from all the people that were thrown into the gulag.
Yeah. Or they were just really good manipulating U.S. intelligence. And they all told them that they were studying this and then went back to
They're spending their money on stupid shit.
Yeah, and they all just sat around drinking their vodka and
keeping warm.
Yes. Anyways, 3 years later, the CIA sets up its own top secret research at the Stanford Research Institute in California. They were particularly interested in a phenomenon called remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what that is?
Yes. It's being able to witness something that is definitely not in your area.
Yeah.
Or at least witness portions of it. And I have seen some types of True TV or Discovery Channel type documentaries where they have one of these people that can claim to do remote viewing and help with like a police investigation to find a victim of a cold case or something.
Right. So, I mean, you could see why this would be useful to the military. Like, you wouldn't have to spend money and time and lives on recon missions if you could just get somebody to remotely be able to view in and see what the situation is. Or you could have somebody listening in on secret conversations without having to use technology or spies.
It's almost like a drone, but more stupid.
Yeah, it's like a dumb drone. So from the remote viewing, they wanted to see if there was a way to train the average person into being able to access their psychic abilities so that ideally they could take military personnel that are already trained and turn them into psychics rather than taking a psychic and turning them into military personnel, which, I mean, it seems kind of backwards. I feel like it'd be easier to take a psychic and turn them into a soldier than to take a soldier and turn them into a psychic.
You don't know their true intentions if you do it that way.
That's true. I don't know. It's like you can teach a singer to dance, but you can't really teach a dancer to sing unless they already were a singer. Know what I'm saying?
I do now you're saying, but I do have to say I agree. If this were true, I do agree with that mentality of trying to teach the average person how to do this rather than hope you have enough people in your country that do have the power to do it.
Right. And I mean, they have security concerns that obviously I'm not taking into consideration. So later that year, the CIA recruited Uri Geller. Do you recognize that name?
Yes, I do.
Well, for those who don't know, Uri Geller is a former member of the Israeli military who also is a famous stage magician that claims to be telepathic and read minds.
It's so weird that you brought him up because I was just watching a random YouTube video about him and other like psychic frauds a few weeks ago.
He's a controversial figure.
Yes.
Because there are people who swear up and down that he's legit, and there have been instances of him being able to see things or do things that are unexplainable. But then there's other instances where he has been caught.
He's just a stage magician that has good salesperson skills. That's really what he is.
Well, you'll see. You will see. You might change your mind, maybe.
Okay. Maybe I don't know about Uri Geller, though.
Well, he's the impetus for this entire project.
Oh, really?
So you're going to need to get an open mind.
Okay.
He was famous in his own right at this time in like the 1970s for doing stage shows, demonstrating like cool magic tricks. He was most known for bending spoons with his mind.
Right.
I think there have been a couple cases where he was proved to have like been doing that fraudulently.
Yeah.
But he also claimed to be able to read minds and see the future. It wasn't that he was doing magic tricks during these shows. It was more of like...
it's that thing where, and I don't remember the term for it, but it's like when you have like a group of people around you, like a bunch of people seated around you, like you are doing a show.
It's like when a medium comes in.
Exactly. And you're bringing up like, I sense someone has had a recent death or something. And with 100 people, chances are at least one person.
Exactly.
And then you're being very general about it.
Well, he was not claiming to see dead people or access spirit
but it's
world.
Just it's that method.
It's that kind. Well, maybe. So you are really, really knocking down Uri Geller a peg.
Yes.
You need to open your mind for this project.
I am.
Nope, you clearly are not.
I am.
He's not. Let's just assume at this time that he is a psychic.
Yes.
Okay,
yep.
And he's real psychic. And he's really reading people. He's really reading people's minds. Okay?
I'm accepting that, but I'm also accepting the fact that he is a fraud too.
Well, I mean, if you're selling,
you can be a little both.
True. Yes. Maybe he was mostly a fraud with some extrasensory abilities.
And look at all the baseball players that were really good, but then they also took steroids. It's like they're good, but they're also cheating.
Okay, tone it down. Uri Geller, as of right now, psychic.
Quite the feller.
Anyways, Uri Geller, super interesting guy. He claimed that at one point that his powers are extraterrestrial and he received his messages from outer space. But he was accurate enough that the government was intrigued enough to recruit him for this top secret project.
Right.
So he was able to fool the government if, in fact, he's a fraud. I choose to believe opposite.
I will also say, though, that the government is not exactly like this omnipotent, intelligent
no, but they
being.
had access to some of the smartest minds in the world.
That's very true.
Not that they always use them.
Correct.
But so here's an example of what made the government interested in recruiting Uri Geller. In a stage show he performed in 1970, he all of a sudden started acting really strange. Like his show was going all well and good and smooth and normal until suddenly he claimed that his heart started racing really fast and he had to sit down. As he's sitting down on stage, he's like goes into a weird trance and then he comes out of it and he says he just had a premonition that the president of Egypt has died. And the audience sits there for a minute and then they all start leaving because if a dude starts like collapsing and then claiming he saw a vision, that's the cheesiest shit ever.
Well, and also it's not like anyone had smartphones at the time where they can instantly check if he's any accurate at all.
I think what happened was it was so dramatic and like cheesy. He probably tried to restart the show and they were like, well, now it's ruined.
Right.
So they all like start trickling out. The show ends. Everyone leaves. They all go home to sit down and watch the news. And the top story is that the president of Egypt died of a heart attack earlier that night.
Mm-hmm.
Coincidence?
Be a very odd coincidence.
Right. So he had a few of these kinds of premonitions over time. And eventually, when the project was created, an American scientist approached Uri and he said, the CIA would be pretty interested in your abilities. Would you be interested in working with us to study them?
Right.
And he said, sure, cool. So the CIA signs off on getting Uri Geller to the States, and he heads to California where he meets Kit Green, who is the CIA analyst who oversees the whole project. So he was like...
Oh, so the project was already started before they brought him on board?
It was created, okay. But I don't know that they had started anything. I think he kind of seemed like the...
Catalyst.
Yes, that's the word. The catalyst for the project.
Sure.
So they had the idea, they recruited him, but then from there it kind of spiraled. So the U.S. is doing this project specifically for the purposes of spying and national intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can they be sure that he didn't just accept this project as a way to get into the U.S. and gain intelligence? He was a former Israeli military member.
Very true.
Well, the U.S. government had a foolproof plan for weeding out whether or not he was legit. When he arrived, they scanned him for bugs, standard protocol.
Like bugs, like electronic
devices, microphones.
Bugs from Israel or wherever he was.
They probably did both. You don't want to bring in any invasive species. But they scanned him. He was clean, probably on both fronts. And then they had him perform a few of his tricks to prove that he was, in fact, legit. And you know how they were sure that he was not faking them out is they had hired a different stage magician to see if they could detect whether or not Uri was using stage magic.
Right. No, that's I forget his name, but the thing I was watching a couple weeks ago was about the other guy.
Okay.
And how he hated Uri Geller until the day he died.
Yeah. It's just, it doesn't seem super watertight.
Well, but I mean, no, it doesn't. But at the same time, though, you got to think, like, when it comes to magicians, obviously there's tiers of how difficult your illusions can be.
Sure.
But all in all, they're pretty much the same. So if you get another magician, and be like, watch out for what he's doing, see if this is actually real or if he's just doing tricks.
Right. And that was their thought process.
So it does make sense.
Right. Uri Geller passes the test.
Sure.
And he officially becomes a subject of Project Stargate.
You think he's getting paid to do this for them? Because he's not American, right?
He's not American. And you know what? I did not read. I did read a lot about this. I did not read if he was paid. I imagine he was, yes.
Yeah, he had to be compensated in some way, because why else would he care?
Right. I mean, why would they keep him here if he was making money off stage shows? I don't know. So I would assume he was getting compensated in some way, whether with like...
Not that it matters. I was just curious because it's like, why is he going to America? Like,
right. I'm not sure. The scientists got to work testing Yuri's ESP abilities, and he did well enough that at the end of the entire project, the experimenters concluded that, quote, as a result of Geller's success in this experimental period, we consider that he has demonstrated his paranormal perceptual ability in a convincing and unambiguous manner.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Stanford Research Institute scientists working for the CIA claiming that psychic abilities are potentially real. What do you think about that? How about them apples?
I mean, that is definitely very impressive and food for thought. I'm just wondering what the tests were.
We're going to get into those. It's just, to me, if I was a top scientist working at a very prestigious research institution, I would probably not want to get into psychic abilities for fear of becoming a laughingstock among the scientific community.
Right.
So to me, that thought makes it a little bit more legitimate.
True.
But I'm sure there are other factors. But it's intriguing to me that with all of the studying they did, they concluded that there was something that they couldn't explain going on.
And what school was that?
Stanford in California.
What? Their great scientific research history, the prison experiment as well. And
well, they're scientific enough. I can tell you're not convinced of Uri Geller's.
I'm open.
Okay. So here are some of the experiments. And honestly, they seem a lot more simple than I would expect a CIA-funded science project to be. Can I guess one?
Because I feel like this is probably one of them. Is it where they have different shapes on cards and he has to figure out which shape is on each card?
Yes, they do that one. And they do that one with a bunch of other subjects that they deem to be
that's
psychic.
like the standard ESP type thing.
Yes, that is one that they perform. But I wasn't going to go through that one.
Oh, okay.
I don't have statistics about that one.
Sure.
But these experiments are similar. Like I was expecting like measuring brain activity and wires and nodes and electrodes.
I feel like even in the 70s, there wasn't a whole lot of advancement with like neuroscience.
Right. Anyways, like before they got time and money to spend on all of that sort of quote unquote scientific technology stuff, they have to prove that he is in fact psychic to make it worth it. So the first experiment they have him do involves dice. They had a box with a single dice in it.
Okay.
Yuri,
six-sided dice.
Six-sided regular game dice. Yuri was unable to see the dice because it was in a box, but the scientists obviously could because they were rolling it. Mm-hmm. His job was to tell the scientists what number the dice had rolled to.
Sure, yeah.
Well, he guessed correctly 8 times in a row.
Interesting.
Which is a 1 in a million odds.
Yeah, the odds of that would be very low.
Right. So the next task was another kind of simple game like this. They lined up film canisters in front of him. And they would put like a small object in one of the canisters, right? And he had to guess which one had the object in it.
It's literally like the cup game that like people do to trick you.
But they're not like shifting it around. They've got like 6 or 7.
Maybe have them blindfolded or something.
Or they take him out of the room and then bring him back in. Yes. He guessed correctly 12 times in a row, which is 1 in a trillion odds in terms of like the number of canisters they had.
That makes me think 2 things. 1, he is psychic. Or 2, 3 things I'm thinking, actually.
Okay.
Second, he has a mole that's assisting him. Or third, the recorders are just fudging the numbers.
What would they have? Like, what benefit would they have?
To keep their project going.
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, this project switched hands so many times. It's...
yeah, but they probably didn't expect that to happen.
True. Well...
I'm just saying it is very outrageous. So it's either he is legit or there's something fishy going on.
And later on, there was a review of the project done to see if it should still go on. And the people who reviewed it said, like, the techniques you used aren't scientific enough, I guess. So, I mean, there's no basis for studying psychic ability this time. So they're kind of winging it, I would assume.
Right. And I mean, even if they did have like better technology available to them to like kind of actually measure his like brain activity or wherever the source of his power comes from, like what are they supposed to do other than dissect him? And they only have one subject, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, they have several subjects. I'm not sure if he was the first one, but he was like the big one.
Sure.
So an interesting thing about this canister experiment, the things that were put into the canister were always something metallic, like a ball bearing, but they had metal components.
And okay.
Throughout the exercise, there were 2 times he could not guess correctly. And those were the 2 times where the objects they put in there had no metallic properties at all. So his powers may have been affected in some way by metal.
Or he had a magnet on him.
Possibly. The thing is, if we're going with the fact that the scientists were not cheating in any way, this was in a controlled area, he would have been
nude.
Could have been. I don't know. I think what you're saying is true and possible, definitely. But I think that you kind of have to trust a little bit that the scientists were performing, as far as they knew, clean experiment.
Sure.
There were a bunch of other experiments. I'll just go through one more. And this was the big one. So the scientists placed Uri Geller alone into a sealed room. He couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything. He was windowless. He's just alone in a room with a chair, basically. In a different room, scientists pulled out a big dictionary and they basically closed their eyes and picked a random word.
Okay.
When they picked this word, they would draw it or something related to it, put it into a sealed envelope, and tape it to the door outside of Uri's room. Now, I think the reason they picked a random word out of the dictionary is because in that way, Uri couldn't just guess based off of what he thinks the scientist might choose.
Sure.
Because I imagine that if he was good at faking it, he'd be able to be good at guessing like what somebody might.
Yeah.
If he'd be able to assess personality.
They're good at reading people and can kind of draw conclusions from that.
Right. So in order to avoid that, they pick a random word. They draw a picture. They stick it in an envelope and they tape it to the outside of Uri's room.
Okay.
His job is to duplicate the drawing without having seen it.
So he's not even guessing the word.
No.
He's just got to do the same drawing. Okay.
Yes. So he sits at this table. In the other room, the scientists are doing their thing, and then they go on an intercom and they say, okay, it's ready. Start drawing. If the drawing is matched, they called it a hit. One of the words they selected was fuse, which is hard to draw. So they just drew a firecracker, like a cylinder with a line that represents the wick and then like a flame.
Sure. Before
Uri started drawing, the experimenters asked him over the intercom what he thought the image was. After the first thing was prepared, but before he started drawing? Yes. Okay. Because not only is he supposed to guess like what they drew, he's supposed to duplicate it exactly. Sure. Like they want to know that he can see the drawing without seeing the drawing. Right. According to CIA documents, when they asked him that, Uri stated that he saw a cylinder with noise coming out of it. And he ended up drawing a drum, which isn't bad. I mean, it's not a firecracker. No, but it is definitely close. Like, if you're just perceiving the image and you don't see the word. Mm-hmm. And it seems as though he's not necessarily even seeing the image. He's getting like a flash of the essence of the image, if that makes sense. Kind of, yeah. So the next word they pick out of the dictionary was bunch. To represent that, they just drew a bunch of grapes. Okay. When they asked Uri what he thought it might be before he started drawing, he said that he saw drops of water coming out of the picture, and then he started talking about purple circles. And then he sat down, he drew a bunch of grapes. And not only that, but his bunch of grapes exactly matched the 24 grapes in the bunch drawn by the experimenter. Not bad, eh?
No.
This happened a bunch more times. And obviously he was not correct every single time.
Sure.
There was one interesting time where the scientists had drawn a devil. And Urey ended up drawing the 10 Commandments, an image of God, and like other images with like religious connotations, suggesting that he was able to like receive like the essence of the message, like the
idea behind it.
But not devil. One interesting thing, Uri Geller is Israeli, which I'm majority Jewish.
Right. Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because I never studied Judaism. But I don't believe there is hell or Satan in Judaism.
No, Satan actually just means adversary in Hebrew.
Right. So the CIA analysts / scientists concluded that this might be his inability to see devil may have been a cultural thing, like not having grown up with the concept of devil.
Yeah.
But he understood the essence of it as like a religious type figure.
It is interesting.
It is. The connection is interesting. So again, he wasn't always correct, but he was correct enough times that the researchers ultimately concluded he had some kind of paranormal perceptual ability. And it's also interesting to note that the specific times he did not guess correctly or could not guess, the drawings were done by a scientist that he personally hated. And
so he has to have like a good connection to their aura, basically.
Right. So when he wasn't able to guess, he'd be like, did fucking Jim draw this shit? And every time he'd be right. Like then the times he couldn't guess, it would be this one scientist he didn't get along with.
You know what that suggests to me, though? That it could definitely be that where he has to like have a close connection to the person, or at least have a good enough relationship with them to actually make this work. But at the same time, it also suggests that maybe there is someone assisting him on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the people that aren't in on it that are the ones he couldn't do it for.
You're ruining the magic of
I'm just saying both sides of the coin. It could be either.
You're being too logical.
Uri Geller is a controversial figure.
Okay.
So I don't know what to think.
Let's move past Uri Geller then. Okay. He was not the only subject. Like I said earlier, there were around 22 some subjects that they had recruited that had shown psychic abilities.
Okay.
Right? Okay. This was a mix of civilians and military personnel. One of the other notable subjects was a man named Ingo Swann.
Ooh.
That's a great name, isn't it? He was the one who particularly specialized in remote viewing. Like Uri Geller was known for his like psychic abilities, but not necessarily his ability to stay in one place and see another place.
Sure.
This man, Ingo Swann, that was his jam. So to test him, scientists would drive to a random location. And from the research lab, Ingo would have to draw a picture of what the other scientists were seeing out there.
Sure.
So he kind of had to channel himself through their eyes, to see through their eyes. And he apparently did really well. At one point, Kit Green, who I mentioned earlier, was like one of the head honchos of this whole project.
Mm-hmm.
He walks into the hallway at the research center and he just tells the first person he sees in the hallway to write down coordinates to literally any location, anywhere in the world, anything.
Okay.
So the guy writes down the coordinates. The coordinates were handed to Ingo. So all he gets are these random numbers, random coordinates, and he needs to describe what those coordinates are and what he would see if he was standing there. So he closes his eyes, he concentrates, and he does it. He described a circular driveway and some hills and a big American flag. And he says he's thinking it's like a military base or something of that nature. Interesting. So Kit takes these coordinates to another psychic in the program. And keep in mind, Ingo had not had a chance to communicate to any of the other
Sure.
psychics. So that he just went straight from Ingo to another person to see what the results would be with another psychic. And this was Pat Price. Pat describes the exact same thing as Ingo, but in even more detail. He claims that what he sees is a former missile test site. He sees launchers, and he can even see that the name of the site is Sugar Grove. He can see inside a bunker in this military base. He can exactly describe the placement of file cabinets and desks down to place cards written on the desks. It's like he's standing there describing it word for word. So Kit's like, what? I've never heard of a place called Sugar Grove. So he goes back to the guy who wrote down the coordinates initially and was like, so what is this place? What do these coordinates take you to? And the guy was like, oh, that's like my cabin in West Virginia. It's just a cabin. I don't know there's no flagpole. There's no driveway. It's definitely not a military bunker. It's just where I go to hang out in the summer. So it appears that they're wrong.
It was wrong, but they both got it matching.
Right, wrong. Which is bizarre, right? So Kit is weirded out because he's like, why would they both come up with the exact same thing? The exact same wrong thing. So he is convinced enough by these two guys that he gets in his car and he drives out to those coordinates in Virginia. And when he gets there, all he finds is a cabin. Just random dude's summer cabin in Virginia. And he's like, oh, that sucks. So he just keeps driving. But as he's driving, he comes across a giant flagpole in a circular driveway. And it turns out that this was a top secret military facility with the code name Sugar Grove. And it was so classified that the CIA guy who had written down the coordinates didn't even know it existed next to his cabin.
Mm-hmm. But you can just stumble upon it from driving?
Here's the thing. I had the same thought. So I didn't have access to a map or anything. They didn't give the coordinates of this military base.
Sure.
But yes, I had that question as well. But clearly it was obviously that guy didn't drive in that direction if he never saw it.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, that they would detect the military base and not the cabin.
I guess it depends on how specific the coordinates were, how many decimals they go down to.
Sure. Kit finds out that the information Pat gave describing that bunker in Sugar Grove was so completely accurate down to the placement of the file cabinets and what the place cards on the desks said, that it sparked an actual espionage investigation against Pat Price. Because either somebody had infiltrated the base and given him that information, or he actually is psychic.
Right. Yeah, that was what I was saying the whole time, and you were shitting on me for it. I was saying there either has to be an insider or he's psychic.
Right. Well, he passed the espionage investigation.
Okay.
So they concluded that he was able to remotely view it. So scientists have found these people. They've confirmed that they have some unexplainable abilities. They haven't been able to explain where they come from or how they access them. But they've kind of confirmed yeah, these people exist. Or at least there's something bizarre being accessed that we just don't understand.
Sure.
So they needed to use these people.
Of course.
Why not? It's government.
Yeah.
In 1974, Patty Hearst
That name sounds familiar
was
too.
famously kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army.
Yeah.
It was a big, major deal. Apparently, the police in that investigation called in Pat Price and they had him look at a book full of mugshots because they had no idea who had kidnapped Patty Hearst. Pat Price glances through the mugshots and he points at one. He accurately points out Donald DeFreeze, who was actually one of the founding members of this Symbionese Liberation Army. He was also able to describe the type and location of the car that was used to kidnap Patty Hearst. He provided other shockingly accurate information. I can't remember. I didn't write this down, but there was another mugshot he identified, and he looked at it and he was like, something about a wolf. Something about a wolf. And this guy got his tooth taken out without anesthesia. And
weird.
Yes.
So like,
it turns out
irrelevant information, but I assume accurate.
Well, yes. It turns out that the guy's last name in that mugshot was Lobo, which is Spanish for wolf. He had, in fact, gotten his tooth taken out at some point without anesthesia, and he was one of the people who kidnapped Patty Hearst.
Oh.
So it's accurate information. They didn't know that at the time. So, I mean, it technically was not particularly helpful in finding Patty Hearst because they knew Donald DeFreeze was the head of the Liberation Army. Pat Price didn't, but they knew that.
Sure.
And, knowing something about a wolf and a tooth taken out without anesthesia is not particularly helpful. And they had no way to prove that the car he described was the car that had taken Patty Hearst. He was correct, but they didn't, how are they supposed to use that information?
Right.
In 1976, one of the other subjects of the project, Rosemary Smith, accurately located a lost Soviet spy plane using remote viewing. And they were able to, physically access it. Another top secret mission in Africa. Pat looked into nuclear testing facility, and the stuff that he's able to describe through his visions is eerily spot on. So much so that he was eventually just straight up recruited by the CIA as an intelligence asset. So he was no longer just a project subject. He became a CIA intelligence officer. But after becoming that officer, mysteriously, a couple months later, he died. Really mysteriously, in a completely weird and random way, because he was a totally healthy dude. And there are a lot of rumors about his death. It was he was poisoned, but there was not even an autopsy done because somebody showed up at the hospital and told them that they couldn't do one.
So maybe he got on someone's wrong side after he saw something he wasn't supposed to see.
Could be. I mean, there were people who witnessed his death, and members of the CIA were don't talk about it. It was probably just an accident. Kind of like Men in Black saying it was just swamp gas.
Right.
The people who witnessed his death, they got weird, mysterious clicking noises when they picked up their phones, they were clearly being tapped. But nothing ever came of it. We still don't know how he died, and there's never will. Yeah, no, we won't. So the psychic subjects of this project, Project Stargate, consulted on hundreds of different events, and they were able to provide generally accurate information or information that lined up with intel that the military already had from other sources. But it wasn't new information. Their degree of success, according to the military, met or surpassed current intelligence operations. They were able to see details of things. And even though they're being taken seriously at this point, they're not providing useful information.
Right.
Technically, they're functionally useless because the military already has ways of accessing this information that are confirmable rather than remote viewing.
Sure.
So eventually the CIA stops funding the program, and it's taken over by the military specifically for the continuation of figuring out how these abilities can be weaponized. So when the CIA had it, that was the ultimate goal, but it was more focusing on, is this real and what is it?
And determine how it works rather than just how to use it.
Right. So the military takes over, and their goal is weaponize. Specifically, can you train people to have these same types of psychic powers?
Sure.
The answer to that is no. In 1983, the program was under the control of Army intelligence, and they created a program called Rapid Acquisition Personnel.
RAP,
yes. Essentially, the military wanted to see if they could train Army personnel into being able to use the same remote viewing techniques that the test subjects used. And the techniques they used to try to unlock psychic powers in these people were friggin' weird. Basically, these trainees were supposed to learn how to access a higher consciousness
So they're doing drugs and stuff?
No, they sit in a circle and hold hands and listen to meditation tapes from level 1 to 21. And they start off like normal cheesy meditation tapes, right? Like, close your eyes.
Sure.
Imagine this. Over time, the tapes start asking questions in the middle of the meditation, like, where's the next terrorist attack going to be? Who is the next major terrorist? Like that sort of thing. This did not work, as you might imagine. At one point, though, like the stress and just the weirdness of it caused one of the trainees to have a mental breakdown. And they threatened to kill the director of the program with a ballpoint pen.
Cool.
Yeah, badass. This is obviously not a good look, and the Army canceled the entire program, seeing as it was not working.
Or at least their tests weren't working.
Right. So the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, revived it, but they were not trying to train people. They went back to focusing on studying the existence of psychic abilities. However, in 1991, it comes out in the news that some of these remote viewer project subjects are contracting their services out to other people, which is obviously a conflict of interest in a government project. And this became international news, like international headlines, which is obviously extra terrible because this is technically still a classified project. Like nobody is supposed to know about it. Even though I gotta imagine it's hard to keep classified if it's changing hands from department to department to department.
Yeah, with more and more people learning about what was happening. Yeah.
Right. So eventually all of this gets to Congress. And Congress is like, what the fuck are we spending our money on? Like, what is this? So they order a 2-month investigation to study 23 years of research. And since 2 months is not very much time,
especially for just elected officials,
they did not analyze every single experiment. They took 10 experiments from the final year of the program. So of the hundreds of experiments happening over all of the years, they're basing everything off of the final 10 experiments. The experts that did this like internal investigation agreed that there's some freaky shit that happened in these experiments, even in the final year. They weren't able to find outright fraud, but they did say that the experiments probably could have done better, and there wasn't any independent replication anywhere else. So essentially, even with all that research, the psychics never gave any useful information and failed to provide concrete scientific evidence for the existence of remote viewing.
Sure.
Like, I mean, there was plenty of anecdotal evidence from all of these experiments, but there was no like scientific explanation for it. And therefore,
do you know if they like actually recorded any of these like on video or anything, especially in the later, like, I mean, obviously they had cameras and stuff in the 70s, but I'm wondering, like, especially later, like into the 80s, they had to have videotaped this.
That I'm not sure. Again, this is a high level overview.
Right.
I did there's 13 million documents, so I paged through quite a few of them just to kind of see like the gist. There's some interesting like memos, detailed memos. I read a couple of those.
Yuri Geller shit his pants again.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
There were too many to sift through, so like I didn't get to any of the like cool important ones. Pretty thorough. Like they took their notes. I think that there's a lot of stuff, minutia, that has to be documented in official government memos. Some of the people who reviewed the program seemed to completely believe in it and agree that like psychic abilities are real. Psychic effects are apparent in these experiments, but like we have no explanation for it.
Right.
Others say they think something's going on, but it's not psychic mental phenomena. It's got to be something else. But again, we don't have an explanation for it. Something weird's happening, but it's not ESP. Basically, the opinion that the program was useless won out, and the project was shut down for good in 1995.
I mean, it makes sense because like something like this could always be restarted again in the future, and like who knows, maybe right now there is a similar project happening that we don't know about.
Well,
I'm just wondering if the tech wasn't there yet to actually measure this type of stuff.
right, possibly. Okay, so obviously this project became a laughingstock because it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
Movies were made about it. I think like The Men Who Stare at Goats or something is based off of Project Stargate.
Familiar. I've never seen that, though.
Neither have I. There is some compelling evidence that came out of Project Stargate, and we've never had a chance to figure out how or why some people are able to see or experience things that other people can't. And obviously, to our knowledge, the government is not about to fund massive amounts of research into this. Or are they?
There's a lot of unaccounted for money in Congress.
Well, in 2014, as in 7 years ago, the Office of Naval Research launched a 4-year program to explore the use of premonitions among sailors and Marines. Some of the people who worked on Project Stargate are still working on privately funded studies like that have sprouted from Project Stargate. Clearly, people who saw the project in action or read the whole shebang believed enough in it to continue the research. Obviously, the Office of Naval Research had to have had some knowledge of Project Stargate before beginning their premonition studies.
What kind of premonitions do you think sailors have?
I don't know, like, the seas will be rough tonight.
Yeah, I was just going to say, red sky at night, sailor's delight.
That's not a premonition. That's true.
Oh, okay.
So we never got an explanation about where these psychic abilities came from or what they are, unless you want to believe Uri Geller's theory that it's extraterrestrial. Which, why not? Aliens. Let's just say aliens did it.
I mean, if we are to accept the fact that some people have psychic powers, that's just as viable of a conclusion, I guess, as any other.
Right. Okay, there's one random fact that has nothing to do with it, but kind of does at the same time. A weird amount of the psychics, of those 22 psychic subjects that were studied, were Scientologists. Either current or former Scientologists. Yeah, it's weird. There was one theory that was mentioned that might explain ESP in general, and that theory is quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
I don't understand it at all. I read an article about it. It's some kind of theory where certain groups of particles are able to communicate with each other even if they're apart from each other. And that's why people might be able to see locations they're not physically at. They're thinking like birds have extra...
Right, and I was going to say, not only does it explain remote viewing, but it could explain talking to each other psychically too, like telepathically. So maybe that's why those two subjects were able to come up with the same coordinates as well. Like maybe one actually saw it, but the other one was just kind of reading the aura of the first guy and explained the same thing.
That would make sense if the second one was less detailed than the first one.
True, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the science went way over my head. My eyes glazed over. I'm sure it was very fascinating, but at this point, I had already been reading about Project Stargate.
That's getting into like dimensional physics and... I mean, yeah, that's very confusing.
Yes. So, I mean, I'll just throw out that was offered as a potential explanation to be studied.
Sure.
But
I think there's a little more viable things that could be gained from studying quantum mechanics versus
right. Yes.
remote viewing.
I mean, they did in the article I read, it was interesting. They said that there is a theory that birds have some sort of quantum entanglement situation going on in their eyes that allows them to view Earth's magnetic field, which assists them in their migration.
Yeah.
That was an interesting tidbit.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I mean, there's no proof behind that, but that's like a theory.
Right. So that's Project Stargate. I glossed over a lot of it to just give you a broad overview. Clearly, you're a hater.
I'm not a hater. I only hate Uri Geller. But the rest of the project was actually very convincing, especially since...
Well, there's 12 million pages.
Right. How much I don't know if you ever saw this, but I wonder how much funding went into this over the decades.
Obviously enough to be brought to Congress's attention.
But at the same time, it was only 22 subjects. It's not like it was a large-scale operation.
Right, and clearly they weren't using super high-tech equipment. They were using a dictionary, an envelope, and a piece of paper.
They were shoving it from agency to agency.
Right, so I mean, it was divvied up by agency, so there could have been a ton of money spent on it, but just little bits by a variety of different departments.
Right, just kind of the surplus that they may or may not have.
Right. So you get the gist, and the gist is that psychics could be real, and they could be looking at you right now while you sleep.
Or you could be one.
You could be one. And if you are, please write to us, podcast@nerdsloth.com.
That would be cool if anyone has had an actual psychic experience, whether it be, remote viewing-esque or
are you a medium? Have you seen ghosts?
Spirits?
Tell us your tales.
Do you talk to Odin?
Yeah.
Fill me in. Well, I have a couple quick things I wanted to talk about here. First, I found this post, and the reason I found it is because it's kind of trending right now because we're close to Halloween, but this is actually a really old article. This is from 2014, actually, but I thought Colleen would enjoy it. An unemployed British man from Portsmouth was arrested April 29th and later fined after pretending to be a ghost near mourners at a grave.
Oh, no.
While a nearby family was paying their respects to a lost loved one at Kingston Cemetery, a drunk 24-year-old, Anthony Stallard, was throwing himself backwards, waving his arms around and going, "Ooh."
Oh my God. Why do I feel like drunk Chris Coney from Saturday Morning Cartoon Boom would totally do this?
And basically, he was just being an asshole at a cemetery, and he was drinking, and he was fined the equivalent of $58 US.
That's it for this?
Well, the thing is, what did he really do other than be an asshole?
Point. Honestly, yeah, it's terrible and disrespectful, but I would get a chuckle from it.
He was arrested, just, I'm sure while they tried to figure out what was happening, but he didn't spend
public
jail
drunkenness
time.
Or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I did find one other thing, and this is a little spooky, but I also just found it very interesting. So this comes from NPR last month, August 27th. Scientists discover fossil of a 4-legged whale with a raptor-like eating style.
What?
So, a team led by Egyptian scientists have dug up a 43 million-year-old fossil in the Sahara Desert of a now extinct amphibious 4-legged whale. The authors of the study say that this creature had unique features of the skull and that its mandible suggests a capacity for more efficient oral mechanical processing. So in other words, these whales had a strong raptor feeding style and not only could swim, but could walk on land.
How big we talking?
I thought that same thing too, and it doesn't state that in this article, but they have an illustration of it eating a sawfish, and I'll have Colin quick look at it too. But it's bigger than the sawfish, and those are pretty big.
Metal.
So I imagine it's probably the size of an orca, maybe, but it also has 4 legs and a giant snout with teeth.
That's gross.
I thought it was so fascinating, though.
It looks like a cryptid. Honestly, it kind of looks like the hodag, but with a long face instead of a short face.
But this isn't really spooky, but this is actually a fascinating discovery because it's a missing link in evolution.
Why would orcas exist?
Yeah, and other whales, dolphins too. It's just weird.
Except for orcas are dolphins. They're not whales.
Right.
Just saying.
Cool.
The more you know.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Proud of you. But yeah, that's all that I had today. Keep an eye out for that cryptid. If it still exists, it's a cryptid.
Oh.
That'd be very scary. That'd be scarier than a shark because it can chase you. Land shark.
Yeah. Land shark.
So if you come across any stories that you find in the news, or if you have a personal story that you would like us to read on the podcast, send it over to us. You can send it through Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. All are at NerdSloth HQ.
Or, like I said earlier, you can email us at podcast@nerdsloth.com. Write a little spooky in the subject line. We would love to hear your stories. Send us your pics. Send us your psychic evaluations of us. Read our minds. What am I thinking right now? Send it over.
Can I guess?
Sure.
Boobs.
Boobs?
Yeah.
No, man. I was thinking about mellow cream pumpkins.
They look like boobs.
They do kind of look like boobs. Ooh.
See, I'm getting it. I'm getting the basic aura.
Ooh, the basic aura.
All right. We'll catch you next week, and I will have a tale of my own to share.
All right. So we're glad to be back. We'll talk to you in a week.
Bye.
We love you. Bye.
Presented by NerdSloth,
a place for lazy nerds.
If you like what you heard, consider donating at patreon.com/nerdsloth so we can continue bringing you quality shows. Be sure to also leave us a review and share your favorite episodes and clips on social media. If you're looking for more content, visit us at nerdsloth.com.